A horse screamed in the dark. The sound cut through the canyon, sharp and ragged and full of pain. Something heavy crashed through the brush below, breaking branches, kicking up loose stones. A second scream came right after the first. Closer this time. Hooves slammed hard against rock. A body hit the ground hard, and a long, wet groan came after, the kind no animal makes unless something is wrong inside it. A man pulled his rifle slowly from the saddle. He did not fire. He listened. Then he saw it. A black Mustang, slick with blood, dragging one hind leg through the cold moonlight. The cowboy's name was Wyatt Hale. He had ridden these mountains for nearly 30 years, and he had never seen a wound like that one. What was waiting beyond that ridge would change everything he believed about this country. Stay with me on this one. The ridge fell away under a thin layer of summer grass and shale. Wyatt slid off his roan and tied the reins to a juniper. He kept the rifle in his hand. The Mustang had not run. That was the first thing that bothered him. A wild horse, hit like that, should have been a quarter-mile gone by now. Fighting, bleeding, trying to die alone the way wild things do. This one just stood there, about 15 feet from him, breathing in shallow pulls. Waiting. He moved closer. Slow. One boot, then the other. He kept his eyes off the horse's eyes, because eye contact in the wild is a threat. The Mustang did not flinch. When he got within reach, he saw the wound clearly. Right hip. Clean entry. Ragged exit. Big caliber. He had butchered enough elk in his life to know what a rifle does to muscle, and this was a rifle. Not a coyote. Not a stray bull. Not a fall down a ravine. Someone had shot this animal. They had shot to kill. And they had missed the spine by maybe an inch. He let out a slow breath. Easy now, he said. His own voice sounded loud in the canyon. Even the wind had gone still. The Mustang turned its head and looked at him. Looked at him direct. And believe me, that was the second thing that bothered him. Horses don't do that. Wild horses especially don't do that. They look past you, around you, through you. This one looked into him. Like it had been waiting for him. Specifically, Wyatt was 61 years old. He had ridden these high mountains since he was 15, riding fence with his father, then later running cattle of his own across more than 6,000 acres of country that the maps didn't bother to detail. He had buried his father out here. And his mother. And 3 years ago, under a cottonwood near the South Spring, he had buried his wife. Since then, he had stopped going home for weeks at a time. Home was just walls. The country was where she still felt close. He had been alone so long that the silence had stopped being silence. It had become a kind of company. But this was different. The Mustang took one step toward him. Then another. Wyatt held very still. The horse came close enough that he could smell the iron of its blood and the sweet musk of its coat. And then it did something he would not have believed if anyone had told it to him. It pressed its forehead against his shoulder. He didn't move. He stood there in the wind, with a wounded wild thing leaning into him, and he felt something he hadn't felt since the morning his wife stopped breathing. He felt asked. "All right," he said. "All right." The Mustang lifted its head and turned. Walked 5 paces. Stopped. Looked back. And he understood. Wyatt mounted his roan and followed. Now here's the thing about that part of the country. He had skirted the edges of it for 40 years and never gone into it. Nobody did. The maps showed it as blank. The old-timers had a few names for it, none of them friendly. There was no water up there. No grass. No reason for any animal to be there at all. The Mustang led him north along the rim of the canyon and straight into it. He checked his radio twice as he rode. No signal. He had told nobody he was up here. He was 61 years old, alone in country with no name, and following a wounded animal that was leading him somewhere on purpose. And he kept going. They climbed for 2 hours. The Mustang never sped up and never slowed down. It bled the whole way. A red trail down the rock. Wyatt watched the wound, and what he saw amazed him. By every rule he knew about animals, that horse should have been dead. Should have collapsed an hour ago. But it kept walking. Kept turning to look at him. Kept making sure he was still behind. The sun started to slide. The country changed. The pines fell away. The slope steepened into something close to a wall. The Mustang turned hard left and disappeared into a stand of scrub oak so thick that Wyatt lost sight of it for a full minute. He had to get down off his roan and lead her through on foot. When he came out the other side, he stopped breathing. A cliff face rose 200 feet above him. Smooth, red, featureless, except for one thing. Behind a curtain of hanging vines, almost invisible from any angle but the one he was standing on, was a black opening in the rock. A mouth in the mountain. The Mustang was already inside. Wyatt stood for a long moment at the entrance. He could feel the cold air pulling out of it. That was always the sign of a deep cave. The shallow ones are still. The deep ones breathe. This one was breathing hard. He pulled his bandana up over his nose, lit a small kerosene lantern from his saddlebag, and led the roan inside. He would not leave her in the open. Whoever had shot the Mustang was still out there. The opening was narrow at first. He had to duck. The roan didn't like it and pulled back twice before he coaxed her through. But after about 20 feet, it widened. Then it widened more. Then it opened into something he could not at first understand. He raised the lantern. The cavern stretched out in front of him, bigger than a barn. Bigger than 2 barns. The ceiling lifted up so high the light didn't reach it. The floor was packed dirt and old straw. Old straw. Somebody had been bringing straw in here. He walked slowly. He saw a wooden trough up against the wall. Hand-hewn. Old. There were buckets stacked next to it. Coiled rope. A pitchfork. He passed under a beam and saw, hanging from a peg, a leather halter. Cracked with age but oiled recently. "My God," he said quietly. He kept going. The Mustang had vanished ahead of him into the dark, but he could hear its hooves on the stone, slow and steady, leading him deeper. He followed the sound. The passage curved to the right, then dropped down a long, shallow slope, and then the temperature changed. It got warmer. Wetter. He started hearing water. Real water. Running water. He came around the last bend, and the lantern light fell on something that took the strength out of his knees. A spring. Clear as glass. Pouring out of the rock and spilling into a pool maybe 40 feet across. And beyond the pool, the cavern opened up wider still, into what he could only call a room. A natural room, vaulted and massive, with a thin shaft of pale evening light coming down from somewhere far above. A skylight in the rock, hundreds of feet up. The light fell on the pool and on the floor of the room. And on the floor of the room were horses. 13 of them. He counted twice. 13 wild Mustangs, standing quiet in the gold light watching him. Wyatt didn't move. They were not the ordinary kind. Not the kind he had been chasing off his cattle for 40 years. These were smaller. Compact. Heavier in the chest. Their colors were strange too. 3 of them were duns with black stripes running down their spines. 2 were blue roans of a shade he had never seen. One stallion stood in the front, taller than the others, and on his shoulder was a marking like a faded handprint. Wyatt knew horses. He had known horses his whole life. He didn't know what these were. The wounded Mustang walked across the cavern floor and stood beside the stallion. The stallion lowered his head and pressed his nose against the wound. The other horses gathered close. None of them moved fast. None of them spooked at the lantern. They had seen people before. "You," Wyatt whispered. "You let him go. You let him go to find me." Nobody answered. But the stallion lifted his head and looked at him long. Wyatt sat down on a flat stone at the edge of the pool. He put the lantern down. He took off his hat. He let his hands hang between his knees and just stared. He had heard stories. Every cowboy in that country had heard stories about a strain of horse the Spanish had brought across in the 1600s. Smaller, tougher, better than anything that came after. The kind of horse the old vaqueros said could go 3 days in country that would kill a quarter horse in 8 hours. Most people thought they were gone. Bred out. Lost. The federal roundups in the 70s had finished what the ranchers and the slaughter trucks started, and the few that were left had been swallowed up into ordinary herds. Except apparently these. These had been hidden. He looked around the cavern again. The trough. The buckets. The halter. Somebody had been hiding them. For how long? He stood up slowly and lifted the lantern again. He wanted to see the rest of it. There was a passage on the far side of the pool that led off into more dark. He stepped around the water carefully so as not to startle the herd and walked toward it. What he found in that passage made him sit down a second time. A door. A real door. Wooden planked with iron hinges. Set into the rock wall as if the rock had been carved out around it. He pushed it. It swung open easy on greased hinges. Inside was a cabin. Not a shack. A cabin. One room, low ceiling, dirt floor. A small iron stove with a chimney pipe running up into a hole drilled in the rock. A bed with wool blankets. A table with 2 chairs. Shelves on the back wall, neatly stacked with cans, bags of feed, kerosene, lamp oil, salt. And books. A whole row of books with cracked leather spines. Wyatt set the lantern on the table and slowly turned in a circle. He had never in his life walked into a place that was so plainly someone's home and so plainly empty at the same time. But it didn't feel wrong. That was the strangest part. It didn't feel like trespass. It felt like the place had been left for him. Like somebody had finished their work, laid out the tools and gone. He sat down at the table. He pulled his canteen up and took a long drink of cold spring water. He set it down. He looked at the books. He smiled. For the first time in 3 years, he smiled. He thought, I have stumbled on the most beautiful thing I have ever found. He thought Sarah would have loved this. He thought, I don't have to go back yet. And in that quiet, grinning, stunned old man's silence, with 13 impossible horses breathing softly in the next room and a clear spring running through a stone cathedral, and his hat off and his hands warm, Wyatt Hale believed for one full minute that this was a gift. Then he saw the boots. They were sticking out from behind the wood stove. He hadn't seen them when he came in because the lantern had been on the table, and the table had been between him and the back wall. Wyatt stood up. The boots didn't move. He picked up the lantern, took 2 slow steps forward, and looked over the top of the stove. An old man lay on his side on the dirt floor. White hair, brown skin, a small body curled up like he had gone to sleep. His throat had been cut. The blood under him was still wet at the edges. Wyatt's heart, which had been quiet for the last hour, started hammering. He set the lantern down on the stove and crouched. He put 2 fingers against the side of the old man's neck. The skin was warm. Not body warm, but not cold. Not even close to cold. He had been killed within the hour. Wyatt straightened up and listened. Hard. Outside, far off down the passage where the herd was, he heard nothing. Inside the cabin, he heard nothing. Just the spring. Then he heard a voice. It came from somewhere behind him. From back the way he had come. A man's voice, low, saying something he could not make out. Then a second voice. Then a laugh. And the truth of where he was hit him like a cold hand on the back of his neck. He had walked into a hiding place that had just stopped being a hiding place. Somebody had killed the old man. Somebody had come in here for these horses. And whoever it was had not left yet. They were still here. And now he was here too. Stop. Think. Wyatt put his back against the cabin wall and made himself breathe. He had hunted in these mountains for half a century. He had outweighted bears. He had outweighted blizzards. He had outweighted himself. He could outweight this. He blew out the lantern. The cabin went black. He stood in that darkness, in that small room, with a dead old man at his feet, and listened to the voices of strangers somewhere in the cave he was standing in. Now, if you're still with me, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. There is more story coming, and you don't want to miss what happens next. Wyatt's eyes started to adjust. A faint line of light came in around the cabin door. He moved toward the shelves where the books were. He had seen one in particular when he sat down. A leather book, fat and worn, with a cord around it. The kind of book a man writes in. His hand found it. He pulled the cord. He didn't dare light the lantern again. But there was just enough light from under the door to see the page if he held it close. The handwriting was small, careful, old-fashioned. The first page said, "This account begun by Manuel Reyes, in the year of our Lord 1903, on the trust of his father Tomás Reyes, who received it from the Apache who had it before him." Wyatt turned a page. Then another. He skipped ahead. The book talked about a herd. The same herd, he realized, from generation to generation. A small band of horses, descended from the original Spanish stock, hidden in this cave by an Apache band in the 1850s when the cavalry started killing horses to break the people. Then handed off, when the last of that band died, to a Mexican family who took the trust on. Then handed off again. Then again. Then again. The names were in the back of the book. A list. Going down the page like a family tree. Manuel Reyes, 1903 to 1947. Felipe Reyes, 1947 to 1966. Joaquin Reyes, 1966 to 1992. Esteban Reyes, 1992 to. Esteban Reyes. The blank after his name had not been filled in. Wyatt looked over his shoulder at the boots sticking out from behind the stove. So that was who he was looking at. The fourth man in a line that went back 4 generations. The man whose job had been to keep these horses alive and out of the hands of anyone who would sell them, kill them, or breed them out. He had done it by the look of this room, alone, for over 30 years. And he had died for it tonight. The voices outside got louder. Not closer. Just louder. They were arguing. Wyatt could pick out a word here and there. Loading. Trug. Trail. And one phrase, repeated by the man with the deeper voice, that put a knot in Wyatt's stomach. The rest of them. They didn't know yet. They had killed Esteban and gotten one Mustang on the run. But they didn't know about the cavern. About the 13. They would, though. Eventually. And when they did, they were going to clean it out. Wyatt closed the book. He held it tight against his chest. He stood there in the dark for a long time. He could feel the dead man behind him. He could feel the horses behind that. He could feel 4 generations of men who had been carrying this thing on their shoulders, one by one, for over 150 years, until it was now standing in front of him. He thought very clearly, I'm not going to be the one who lets this end. He set the book down on the table. He picked up his rifle. And he walked toward the voices. Wyatt knew this kind of country, and now he knew this kind of cave, and the men out there did not. That was his only advantage. He kept it close. He moved back along the passage with the lantern dark, one hand on the cold rock wall, the other on his rifle. He had hunted enough at night to walk without seeing. He could hear his own breath, and he made himself slow it. He passed the cabin door. He passed the spring. He felt the warm, wet air give way to the bigger cold of the cavern. The horses were quiet. They knew. He could feel them watching him in the dark. 2 voices. He listened again. 2 voices, and one of them just pulled back on a slide. A pump action. He knew that sound. He pressed himself flat against the wall, behind a knob of stone, and waited. A flashlight beam swung across the cavern wall, sloppy and wide. They were just inside. Maybe 40 feet from him. 2 men, both big, both armed. The one in front had a high-powered rifle with a scope. The kind that could put a hole through a hip from 200 yards. The one behind had the pump shotgun. They were heading toward the spring. Esteban said there were maybe 4 or 5, the front man was saying. He sounded young. Where are they? Forget Esteban, said the one with the shotgun. Old man lied. He always lied. We get the one that ran and we go. That one's not gonna make it. You shot him in the hip. He'll bleed out within a mile. We track him and we cut the brand off. They pay for the brand alone, and we don't have to haul a body. The brand. Wyatt felt his teeth clench. He thought of the stallion in the cavern with the handprint on his shoulder. He thought of the old man dead on the cabin floor with a list of names in his book. He stepped out from behind the rock. Dropped the rifle. The front man jumped. The flashlight beam swung wide and caught Wyatt across the chest. Both men froze for 1 full second, and Wyatt used that second to slide the bolt on his Winchester. I said drop it. Who the hell are you? Said the one with the shotgun. Drop the rifle. Both of you. Now. I will not say it again. The young one started to lower his weapon. The older one didn't. Mister, you want to walk away from this, he said. We got buyers. We got money. Whatever the old man was paying you, we'll pay double. I'm not walking away. Then you're gonna die in here. Maybe. There was a long, ugly second where nothing moved. Wyatt watched the older man's eyes. He had seen those eyes before. Not on hunters. On the kind of men who came up from the cities looking for trouble and called it business. The older man brought his shotgun up. Wyatt fired first. The shot took him in the right shoulder and spun him hard. The shotgun hit the rock floor. The man went down with a roar that filled the cavern, and the horses behind Wyatt scattered for the first time, hooves like thunder against stone, the whole cathedral suddenly alive with sound. The young one dropped his rifle and put his hands up. I ain't with him. I ain't with him. Don't shoot, mister, please don't shoot. Get on your face. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hands behind your back. Yes, sir. Wyatt kicked the rifle and the shotgun across the floor away from them. He pulled his piggin string out of his belt, the same string he used on calves at branding, and tied the young one's wrists. Then he checked the older one. The shoulder was bad, but he wasn't going to die from it. He tied his wrists too, with his own belt hard. The older man was cursing through his teeth. "You don't know what you just stepped in, old man," he hissed. "You don't know who we work for. You're gonna disappear out here, and nobody's even gonna look." "I've been disappearing out here for 40 years, Wyatt said. "Nobody's looked yet." He stood up. He took their flashlight. He took both their weapons. He took the keys he found in the older one's pocket. To a truck somewhere outside at the bottom of the trail. The horses had backed against the far wall. The wounded Mustang was with them, leaning against the stallion's flank, breathing rough but standing. The stallion stood between the herd and Wyatt. The handprint on his shoulder caught the lantern light. "Easy now," Wyatt said. He didn't approach. He just stood there in the middle of that cathedral and let the herd see him. The stallion watched him for a long time. Then slowly he lowered his head. Just a little. Just enough. Wyatt nodded back. He turned to the two men on the floor. "You shot him in the hip on purpose," he said. He wasn't asking. He was thinking out loud. "You wanted him to bleed out somewhere we wouldn't find his body. So you could take the brand and sell the meat and pretend the herd never existed." The older man spit on the floor. "You gonna kill us?" Wyatt thought about it. He thought about the old man behind the stove. He thought about Manuel Reyes in 1903. He thought about an Apache band in the 1850s, hiding their last horses from the cavalry. "No," he said. "I'm not gonna kill you. I'm gonna walk you out of here, and I'm gonna drive your truck down the mountain, and I'm gonna hand you to the sheriff. You shot a man tonight. You're gonna answer for that man before you ever answer for one of these horses. You're making a mistake." "Probably." He picked up the lantern. He looked at the herd one more time. "I'll be back," he said. "I'll be back." And he marched the two of them out of the mountain. The sheriff's name was Bennett. He had known Wyatt for 35 years, and he didn't ask too many questions when Wyatt came down out of the high country at sunrise, driving a strange black pickup with two tied-up men in the bed, and a wounded shoulder on one of them. Wyatt told him most of it. Not all. He said he had been tracking a wounded Mustang, and he had walked into a poaching operation. He said the older man had pulled a shotgun on him. He said he had defended himself. He didn't say where the cave was. He didn't say a word about the horses. Bennett looked at him a long time across the desk. "Wyatt," he said. "You all right?" "I'm all right." "You sure?" "I'm sure." Bennett nodded slowly. He had been sheriff long enough to know that there were things in that country that men did not put into reports, and the country was bigger than the reports anyway. "You go on home and rest," he said. "I'll handle these two." "Thank you, Cal." Wyatt drove his roan and trailer back up the mountain that same afternoon. He went to the cabin first. He spent 2 hours with Esteban Reyes. He carried the old man out, slow and careful. He found a place at the back of the cavern where the floor was soft, and he dug a grave by hand with a shovel he found leaning against the cabin wall. He laid the old man down. He covered him over. He stood at the head of the grave a long time, with his hat in his hand. "I never knew you," he said. "But I think I know you now. And I'll carry it from here." Then he went back to the cabin and he opened the leather book to the back, where the names were. He took a pencil from a tin can on the shelf. He wrote, under Esteban Reyes 1992 to 2024. Wyatt Hale 2024 to. He left the second number blank. Then he sat down in the cabin and he cried properly, for the first time since the day he had buried his wife. He cried for Sarah and for Esteban, and for the 4 men before him, and for the horses and for himself. 61 years old. Alone on a mountain. Sitting in a dead man's house and holding a job that had just been handed to him by a horse. When he was done, he washed his face in the spring. He went out to the herd. The wounded Mustang was lying down by the pool. The stallion stood over him. Wyatt knelt and looked at the wound. It was clean. It was already starting to scab. The bullet had gone all the way through, and the horse, for whatever reason, had decided to live. "You're gonna make it," Wyatt said softly. "You came and got me. You're gonna make it." The Mustang blinked at him. That was the year Wyatt Hale stopped going home. He sold his cattle, all of them, the next spring. He kept the South Spring and the cottonwood where Sarah was buried, and he visited her once a month. He took Esteban's cabin as his own. He learned the country between his own land and the cave the way Esteban must have learned it. Over years. By walking it. He patched the trough. He repaired the door. He put in a new stovepipe. He started reading the books on the shelf at night, and he learned things about horses that he, after 61 years of horses, had never known. He kept the secret. He never spoke of the cave again. Not even to Cal Bennett. Not even when Bennett showed up at his place a year later with questions about a missing man in Nevada, whose people thought he had gone hunting up in Wyatt's country. Wyatt had nothing to tell him. The shoulder-shot man and the young one had both done their time. The buyers who paid them had vanished, the way that kind always does. The country, as Wyatt had always known, was bigger than the men who came to take from it. In the third year, the wounded Mustang sired a colt by a blue roan mare. The colt was born on a soft spring morning with a handprint on his shoulder, just like the stallion's. Wyatt was in the cavern when it happened. He sat against the rock wall and watched the new thing stand up on its legs for the first time, wet and wobbling, and he thought, "I needed this." He thought, "I needed something to take care of." He thought, "Thank you, old horse, for finding me." The next time he was in the cabin, he opened the leather book, and on a fresh page in his careful old man handwriting, he wrote down the date of the colt's birth, and the name of the mother, and the name of the father, and a small note in the margin. The note said, "Sarah's mourning." He closed the book and put it back on the shelf. Outside, the spring ran clear out of the rock and into the pool, and the horses drank, and the light came down through the shaft in the ceiling and fell gold across the floor of the cathedral. And somewhere far above, on a ridge no map had ever bothered to detail, the wind moved over the country and did not say a word. A horse had screamed in the dark on that first night. A man had heard it. And in the end, the mountain had answered with a life.